starting on around day 5 of the challenge, the bot started only raising, and this is what the raise range looked approximately like, given the fact it was only raising. So we can see it kind of gave up with some of these weaker hands, like 6-3 off. It was putting into its range before, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it thought it needs limps, is because you can't play some of these very weak hands if you want to raise into the pot. So, you know, we see the 5-3 off, the 4-3 off, 7-4 off, all being kind of around the edge of what it looks to play. Now, I want to talk about how it responded to 3-bet, but I also do want to say quickly that there was so many different 3-bet sizes used, and a lot of the strategies of the humans were to pick sizes that wouldn't round to near pot size bets. So I think rounding 3-bet sizes to specific numbers to try and look at data is going to create weird averages that aren't going to be very accurate, frankly. So we're going to instead just look kind of at general how it played against 3-bet, what it called, what it 4-bet. We're going to look more at that kind of stuff rather than trying to give the exact stats to different sizes, because there's such a wide array of them, the different random numbers, that I think it might be a little misleading in some of the stats. So let's start off and look at the 4-bet range. Now, not really surprising to see here the same type of deal that we saw facing an open. Lots of 4-bets spread across lots of different hands. What surprises me, frankly, it surprises me to see some of these hands as weak as 5-3 off getting 4-bet. Very weird. You know, generally speaking, I would see a hand like 5-3 off and think, okay, this is simply far too weak for us to want to put into the range. But, you know, apparently things needs to have some of these some of the time. So that's weird. In general, I would advocate to not put hands that bad into the range, because, you know, we're really not even looking to flat 8-6 or 7-6 off, and, you know, facing 3-bet very often. Was this a very small 3-bet? No, this is a normal size 3-bet. So yeah, don't exactly know what was going on here. I think you have a lot of better choices. I think a lot of this comes down to especially being 200 blinds deep, and especially for the bot thinking that it doesn't want to have any holes in its strategy, that it needs to have a very wide array of preflop holdings over having certain hands. And while that might be better as part of a GTO strategy, I have to imagine the expected value of using some of these hands as bluffs over using the stronger hands that simply cannot call 3-bet would be a better strategy. Maybe he is calling some of these. You know, actually, now that I look at it, it does call all the way down to some of these really low offsuit hands. Although I think these are almost all facing very small 3-bet sizes. So, yeah, that's actually still not kind of the answer. So, yeah, I don't know, guys. Again, I said this before, I'll say it again. I don't exactly know why it does stuff. All I can say is what it did and give my best guesses as to why. Anyway, going back to the 4-bet really quick. A lot of ace-X making it into the 4-bet range. One thing that I find kind of interesting, and it's definitely how I play as a human, very few ace-X suited going into the 4-bet range. I have to imagine because if you're 5-bet, you kind of have to call. And so the ace-X offsuit hands tend to be much better choices. You know, if we look at this as a comparison, we see, like, you know, with the exception of ace-king and ace-queen, we see like approximately 7 suited aces 4-betting. You know, we have like 5 just ace-deuce offs. So we see a lot of these offsuit aces getting 4-bet. A lot of these offsuit kings, definitely a weight put onto the card removal aspect of the 4-betting strategy. And, you know, that makes sense. When we look at 4-betting and heads up no limit, 4-betting ace-X and king-X hands, because they block a good portion of the value range, has been around for a long time. So that's not too surprising. It's a little more surprising to see hands like ace-jack, ace-10 kind of get in there. Those hands seem to be, you know, real awkward. And when we look at hands like this, open 3-bet, 4-bet, 5-bet, fold, it really feels like a bad hand to choose to do this with. So, you know, again, I assume it's sacrificing some of the EV of that hand to have more balanced post-flop strategy, and maybe it thinks that these hands as 4-bets. Let's actually look at something. Let's see that when they did face, or when they did have an opportunity to 4-bet, let's see how frequently hands like ace-10, how often those hands actually chose to do that. Oh wait, this already is filtered facing 3-bet. Okay, so VPIP. Okay, so it mainly called. It just mixed in raise a couple of times, or not a couple of times, but probably around like 15-20%. Still a much higher frequency than what I would imagine. Ace Jack getting in there. King Queen has a bunch of these. Queen Jack has a good sized chunk of these. I guess the blocker effect of these hands must just be strong enough to where it thinks it needs to put some of these into the re-raise range. It's really the only thing I can imagine. I mean, even Jack 10 getting 4-bet a good chunk of the time. Not surprising at all that it doesn't like 4-betting Ace 6 relative to Ace 5 and Ace 7 or Ace 4. Those hands just have better equity against the continue range because they can play to the wheel, so that makes sense. King Deuce off doesn't make too much sense to me. Although I will say the way that it played this post flop does actually kind of remind me of the way that we would approach this post flop. Okay, going for a very large 4-bet size. And then check back with one of your worst top pairs and look to call down. So that actually is kind of familiar. You know, that kind of style of play, certainly something that we as humans have been doing in heads up for a long time. I think that a lot of players nowadays in 4-bet pots are using a very small bet size with many hands. In fact, let's look at that really quick. Let me just see when it does 4-bet, how often it c-bets. 64, 44, 64. So I think a little bit lower than what a lot of players are doing in 4-bet pots, but still definitely higher than in single raise pot situations. Let's go back and look at small blind some more. Let's look at how often it 4-bets with these thin value bets. Pre-flop opportunities 4-bet. Okay, so tens. Wow, tens really mainly just calls. I mean, probably like 60% just raise call, 70% just raise call. Jacks. Man, a lot of just calling. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 13 of the 52 hands, it actually just flatted the 3-bet. Kind of insane. Queens always 4-bet, though. So it clearly thinks that there's much more value in 4-betting queens than jacks. Same with kings. Same with aces. So not one trap versus 3-bet with aces, which maybe that has something to do with playing 200 blinds deep. Maybe at a smaller stack size, it would mix that in a little bit more. But certainly something notable to take away from that, because generally speaking, we tend to lean towards putting a few aces into our call 3-bet range just to strengthen the overall range that does flat the 3-bet. But apparently not really necessary here. Interesting. And when facing a 5-bet, mainly just jamming it in, which is also kind of interesting. Okay, so tens we're looking at mainly call. Nines basically always calls 3-bet. Wow, this is kind of insane. I did not realize how some of these pairs were playing. Eights always calls. So there you have it. Meanwhile, I would never have guessed ace 10 to be more of a 4-bet than tens. Or at least nines, I guess. But that is really some mind-blowing stuff. I guess maybe the removal is really important. You know, maybe blocking those value hands is a centerpiece to the strategy that while we always understood blocking the ace is important, the total effect of blocking multiple value bets ends up making those hands just far, far stronger as 4-bets. I mean, that's what I'm guessing anyway. There is kind of a lack of these strong suited hands from 4-betting that are not really strong. That maybe these hands simply play way too awkward as a 4-bet. You know, when we see Queen 9 suited never getting 4-bet, we see Queen 10 suited never getting 4-bet. Queen Jack suited, you know, these hands, a couple of these hands. And so maybe the thought process there is those hands just suffer too much when they face a 5-bet. Also interesting to me, no ace 10 through ace 8 suited 4-bet. I would have definitely thought we'd see that, but you know, maybe it thinks that those hands have more value in calling in position. Whereas the ace-10, king-jack type hands, focusing on the removal aspects, plays a better role. I don't know, guys. Your guess is as good as mine. I'm just here to bring in the facts. Okay, so what else? What other hands were 4-bet here? A lot of low-suited hands. Not really much of a surprise there. Any low pairs once in a while with like the pocket fours and whatnot. Apparently, you got to mix in the queen 4, guys. You gotta, if you're not 4-betting queen 4 off, you're not living. So okay, interesting. Ace king, interestingly, almost always getting 4-bet. Only actually 9 hands of calling versus 89 hands of 4-betting. So mainly, let's look at ace queen. Is it mainly call or mainly 4-bet? Ace queen mainly calling. Okay, but ace queen suited. Also mainly calling. What's its total 4-bet frequency? Let's take a look at that. 9%. 9%'s on the higher side. Okay. Okay, so it's on the higher side, but with a more blended range of different hands. What's it do with some of these hands facing? Man, as a human, this would just feel so weird to me. I love that. Oh shit! I love that I have to say as a human, but for example, 4-bet folding ace queen. I mean, by the way, no, actually, you're still getting the odds, but yeah. So weird. Fold to the min 4-bet. I mean, I'm sure some of this stuff is wrong. And by the way, by no means is this computer playing, quote, GTO. Certainly some of its preflop stuff, there's some clear errors. But some of the general strategic insight we can take away that it values having these high blockers. It doesn't value the suited hands being as much part of that range. And it leaned towards flatting with the mid pairs. I mean, certainly, as well as with the ace queen suited. So certainly some interesting stuff to take away from here. Let's go ahead and move on. Actually, let's talk about the call 3-bet a bit. So 5-4 off. Let's see here. How often is that getting called? Almost always folding. Mainly folding. And this is also kind of weird because they just face so many sizes. Oh, we see actually, wait. Why is this on call? I'm confused. Call 3-bet. Why is it on? These hands raised. Okay, so I don't exactly know what is going on as to why these hands got put here. I some kind of error, but I'm surprised how often hands like king 8 off call. I always found those hands to really overrealize. Let's look at the weak aces. Ace deuce. So wow, mainly raised folding. You know what? I feel very good about that because I found early on in my career in heads up these hands way under-realized, and I started folding them versus 3-bet. So seeing this program play them the same with ace 3, it mixes in some calls. Ace 4, kind of the same deal going on here. Nice mix of both 4-betting, folding, and calling. Ace 5. Wow. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Ace 6, almost never 4-betting, still folding a lot and working in some calls. So it surprises me, though, that it thinks that hands like king 8 should call so often. I mean, I know this is only like 20 or 25% of the king 8s, but still, just to call that much. Or king 7. Or king 6. I have to imagine these hands underrealized fairly significantly post-flop. But, yeah, big drop-off from king 6 to king 5 as well. Queen 9. Okay, good mix of those. All right. So it's tough to say too much because, wow, 9-5, always raise fold. Okay, 10-5, always raise fold. So these gapped hands, oh, super salty a bit. So these gapped hands definitely likes to let go of, which does make sense. These hands definitely overrealize for sure. But I think it puts more of an emphasis on the value of hands like king 8 because they can make stronger pairs. And definitely likes to have these 5-4 off type hands more often as well. 5-3 off. Putting some calls in, putting some 3-bets in. Let's see if it folds suited hands versus 3-bet. Okay, some of these weak suited hands, 8-4 suited, which is weird to me. I would almost always flat 8-4 suited. I find those hands way over-realized. 9-4 suited. Even folding a lot of 10-4 suiteds. Although it's facing a larger 3-bet size, so that could be why. Maybe we can't put too much stock into that. Yeah, there's so many sizes going on here pre-flop. We don't want to put too much stock into things. But then from 9-5 to 9-6 suited, all of a sudden, always calling, basically no matter what size. Same thing with 8-6 suited. Same thing with all of these suited connectors. 5-4 suited. 4-3 suited. A few folds. And then I would imagine 3-2 suited, yeah, it's getting full decent amounts. So, okay, so we did a walkthrough here of 4-betting, of calling 3-bet. I think we're getting a pretty good idea of what's going on. Let's take a look quickly at big blind 5-bet, and then let's start to jump into looking at some post-flop stuff.